Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. Imagine for a second that you're a teenager growing up in the Middle Ages. But, your childhood isn't about playing outside or having carefree days, not at all. It's defined by this staggering, terrifying reality. Your family's simple faith is outlawed. Your very existence is literally considered a crime by the most powerful institutions on Earth. Today we're diving deep into the profound history of the Waldenses, and we're going to look at it specifically through your eyes, the eyes of their youth. We'll explore the massive risks you took, the highly secretive lives you led, and how you and your family managed to preserve your beliefs in some of the darkest times imaginable.
So, for your family, who had been driven away from the fertile valleys, the towering Alps were way more than just a physical hiding place. They were this deeply emotional, spiritual anchor. The historical sources actually note that your parents would literally point up to the towering heights above you and use the mountains themselves as a classroom. They teach you that just as no human arm could uproot those majestic peaks and throw them into the sea, while absolutely no human decree could blot out the promises of your faith.
Now, here's a really chilling question to ponder. What if the absolute greatest treasure you owned was also a death sentence? I mean, from your very earliest years, you were taught the absolute necessity of total silence and self-control. You were raised by incredibly tender, affectionate parents to endure real hardship, to avoid any kind of self-indulgence, and to be fiercely, fiercely disciplined. And why? Because just one single indiscreet word, just one slip-up in front of strangers or enemies, could risk not just your life, but the lives of hundreds of your family members and friends. Your religious heritage was your greatest treasure, but guarding it meant living every single day with the constant threat of death.
When we look closely at the historical texts, we see two totally different worldviews violently colliding. On one hand, your isolated mountain community viewed the Church of Rome of that era as an apostate power. They believed it had trampled over God's original laws, replacing them with complex traditions and overwhelming opulence. But on the other side, you held incredibly fast to your primitive, simple lifestyle. For you, the Bible and the observance of the true Sabbath was the only supreme authority. You certainly weren't worshiping in grand gold-lined cathedrals. Your sanctuaries were the harsh, rocky strongholds of the Alps.
And to protect that supreme authority, you had to go through a completely secret, absolutely grueling education. Since whole Bibles were rare, actually, scratch that, they were highly illegal, you essentially became a living, breathing book. You would systematically commit entire sections of the Bible, like the Gospels of Matthew and John, completely to memory. But it didn't stop at memorization. Deep inside these dark, damp mountain caverns, huddled around the flickering light of torches, you and other youths painstakingly hand-copied the scriptures, literally verse by verse. Then, to move them safely, you meticulously sewed those pages straight into the thick woolen linings of your own clothes.
Just pause for a second and picture the extreme sensory contrast here. You've got the cold, dreary, genuinely frightening reality of an underground cave. Yet to you and your fellow young transcribers, the words you were copying felt emotionally overwhelming. The text described them as shining out like pure gold. The sheer physical torture you went through to preserve these manuscripts actually made them infinitely more valuable to you. You aren't just scribbling words, you truly believed you were interacting directly with your creator, keeping a light burning that the outside world was desperately trying to snuff out.
But here's the thing. This grueling underground schooling wasn't just about hiding. It was preparation for an incredibly dangerous adult mission. You definitely didn't stay hidden in the mountains forever. Traveling in pairs, usually a young person like yourself teamed up with a seasoned, older mentor, you ventured far out from your rocky fortresses. And to pull this off without getting immediately arrested, you adopted the clever disguise of wandering merchants or peddlers. By carrying rare silks, jewels, and luxury goods, you gained entry into homes and royal courts that would have normally slammed the door in your face. And while you were casually doing business, you were quietly, cautiously assessing your customers, just waiting for the perfect moment to pull those hidden manuscript pages out from your coat.
And that brings us to the emotional climax of these incredibly perilous journeys. Imagine the scene. You, a young Waldensian merchant, cautiously pull out a single handwritten page of scripture and show it to a tempest-tossed soul. Keep in mind, the people you're meeting had only ever known a stern, unforgiving system of severe penance. Think midnight vigils, cruel physical scourgings, and these long, agonizing pilgrimages. So when they heard the words of the scripture read aloud, usually in complete secrecy, their reaction was sheer wonder. The historical records tell us they would often interrupt the reader, crying and asking these desperate questions. Will God indeed accept my offering? Will he actually smile upon me? Will he pardon me?
And right then, you, the young missionary, would answer their desperate pleas by reading this simple, comforting promise. "Come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." The historical sources vividly describe the overwhelming joy and total disbelief these strangers felt upon hearing those words for the very first time. The sudden realization that they didn't need to go on physically destroying pilgrimages or rely on a complex system of mediators to find peace, it was completely revolutionary for them. It was a literal flood of light. They felt their deepest fears just vanish, replaced by this sacred joy, because they realized they could come directly to a compassionate God exactly as they were.
Of course, we absolutely have to talk about the immense personal cost of this mission. Make no mistake, sharing this light was considered high treason against the reigning powers. A lot of these young, brave missionaries simply never made it back to their mountain homes. The sources state plainly that many wore out their lives rotting in dark, unknown dungeons, or their bones were just left whitening on the exact spot where they were discovered and executed. And the craziest part? You knew this was the likely outcome the moment you set out. Yet you accepted a martyr's fate completely willingly because you believed the message you were carrying was worth far, far more than your own life.
Eventually, this quiet devotion and highly secretive mission ignited a massive, tragic conflict. Now, on one hand, even their bitterest enemies often admitted the Waldenses were a peaceable, quiet people. Their only real crime was just refusing to worship according to the Pope's will. But on the other hand, the papacy viewed these undercover believers as seducing venomous snakes. So, in response, the Church unleashed these relentless, heavily armed crusades right up into the mountains. The texts describe a fury that literally turned once flourishing, beautiful valleys into utterly devastated deserts.
The sheer, terrifying institutional scale of the persecution they faced is just staggering. We are not just talking about random mob violence here. This was legalized erasure. Through official papal bulls, crusaders were explicitly forgiven for murder. Any business contracts with Waldensians were instantly nullified. Their land, their homes, everything was authorized to be legally stolen. They were effectively stripped of their basic humanity, losing every single legal right and protection they had. It became completely lawful for absolutely anyone to hunt them down like animals. And hunted they were. But this is where that analogy of mountain endurance comes right back into play. As they were pursued across icy peaks and hunted down in hidden valleys, this underground network showcased just incredible strategic resilience. The sheer physical stamina you developed since you were a kid, toiling on rocky soil to grow food, navigating these secret, treacherous mountain passes, embracing severe self-denial. Those became the exact survival tactics that allowed your people to endure literal hunts by massive armies. You survived because you were as tough and unyielding as the hills around you.
And you know what? That incredible resilience had a profound, long-term impact on the world. The quiet courage, the silent copying of texts in freezing caves, the shed blood of these observant Waldensian youths, it wasn't in vain. By carrying those hidden manuscripts across borders for centuries, they acted as a vital, necessary bridge. They kept that ancient faith alive through the absolute darkest periods of the Middle Ages. And in doing so, they laid the crucial foundational groundwork for the massive Protestant Reformation that would eventually erupt centuries later with figures like Wycliffe and Martin Luther.
Which leaves us with a truly profound reflection to end on. Just think about the legacy of the Waldensian youth. They had this faith that was forged in absolute secrecy, nurtured in freezing caves, and carried forward under the constant looming shadow of death. They deeply understood the wisdom of silence, yet they risked absolutely everything to speak when it mattered most. When we look at their immense sacrifices and the enduring power of standing firm against literally impossible odds, we have to ask ourselves, if you were forced to hide your deepest convictions in the dark just to survive, would you have the courage to eventually carry that light out into the world? It's something to deeply consider. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer tracing the incredible history of the Waldensian youth.